Hi everyone, it's Karina Bali here, and this is EDF 5656 Module 10, and we're looking briefly at key principles of working with paraprofessionals. So what are paraprofessionals before we go too far into the next slide? Paraprofessionals are any of those external people that you can work with, like occupational therapists, speech therapists, your school psychologist, and even your various aides can be considered as paraprofessionals as well. So it's really important that you know who these people are in your whatever your school department is, and be aware of their role and how they can assist you with strategies and ideas, especially when you're working with challenging students or students that have diverse needs. So when you're working with others, there's a couple of activities that you can do. Now, obviously this is a PowerPoint, so we would hope that you would have a look at these and perhaps explore them with your staff or with other peers that you have at Monash. And so some activities can help you. So some of these activities can support you to begin to develop an understanding of how you operate as a team member and become more familiar with school and education-based terminology relating to teamwork. So what teams can you identify in your schools? And so some of those might be, I know that when I was working in primary school, there was the early years, middle years, and then senior years, and often they have separate departments. And then you might have a literacy team or a math team. And so there's various, and then you might have your teams related to your actual grade levels. So depending on how big your school, there can be a number of different teams that you can identify with and then work with. So what teams will you be a member of? And then think about the following questions relating to how you operate as a team member. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you could have a read through this and then mentally you can either write it down or you can think about your answers to these questions, because it is really important to consider this. Are you more a leader, or do you prefer to follow, or are you happy to be a collaborator? So just what could be some of your shortcomings. I know for myself, I tend to prefer to lead rather than follow. So deferring my role as a leader can be a little bit challenging for me, and that's definitely a shortcoming that I've had to work on over the years. So as I said before, have a look at these questions, answer them for yourself, and even if you connect with any of your peers, maybe you could work through these questions together and provide some insight to each other as well, which I think is a really good way of doing this. So how do you like to work as a team member? And so rate yourself from 1 to 10, 1 that you don't like it and 10 that you like it a lot. And again, work through each comment or each question systematically and give yourself a bit of a rating. Which habits of mind do you feel you have strength in? And again, go through each step and then rate yourself between 1 and 10. So communication involves us listening to a very broad range of skills. And what does that mean? So especially when you're talking to paraprofessionals, a speech pathologist will approach your student in a different way that you will. Same with an occupational therapist and even a psychologist. So our role as educators, we're more looking at the educational aspects, whereas they will hone in on specifics. So with speech, of course, speech development, language development, vocab acquisition, all of those kinds of things. So they'll have certain language around that. Occupational therapists will be looking at all of the fine motor skills, gross motor skills, behaviour, ways of doing things physically. So they will have a different approach and again, different language. So it's really important to understand what that language is so that we can have a conversation that's on an equal playing field. And it's okay to ask questions, and especially if you don't understand something. And I really found that I made the paraprofessionals my best friend because, especially when I had challenging students who had diverse abilities such as autism or even ADHD or speech issues, I knew that I was out of my, I didn't know everything, I didn't have all the answers. So I valued their input and valued the strategies that they gave me, and they really respect that. And if you value them, then they will put more into what they do with you. And I've always found that the paraprofessionals can make my life a whole lot easier. I have to say, not every educator possibly feels that. Some people get a little bit intimidated about having other people in their classroom. I didn't feel that way, and I think it's something we do need to get over and accept and embrace, because the more collaborative you are, the better it is for your students. So the second thing with communication is the ability to reflect in relation to the way we listen will help us to continue to improve our professional communication skills. Sorry, excuse me. So the role of the Learning Support Officer or Teacher Aide is to work under the direction of qualified teachers and special educators. The Learning Support Officer's role is not to design a plan class. The Learning Support Officer's role is not to design or plan classroom instruction, but rather to make important contributions to the classroom and to support in classroom instruction by effectively implementing delegated tasks for which they are trained. Sorry, that sentence was a bit of a mouthful. But essentially what that's saying is that at the end of the day, you are the educator. You are the trained educational professional. And I have to say, I see this happening in many, many schools that I go to, where the curriculum for the various students that the teacher aide is working with is being deferred to them. They are not trained to design curriculum for diverse students. The educator should be. So it's up to them to make sure that they're driving what happens with that student, and oftentimes that doesn't happen. So the buck stops with you, essentially. So you are responsible. So the Learning Support Officer might be assigned to support one student or the entire class or group of students. So it's really important that you acknowledge their presence, and I would say more than that. You need to, again, embrace them into the classroom. They need to have a role alongside you, not so much in terms of it, as I said, you're the one that's the educational professional here, but you need to respect and value what they do. Communicate with them so that they know what they need to do as well, and make sure that those lines of communication are open between the both of you. Ask them about what they think their role is and how they can best support the student that they're working with or the group of students that they're working with. Discuss the IEP or ILP with them. Many schools don't include excuse me, the teacher aide in any of the IEP or ILP meetings. I personally think it's important to have them there because they're, after all, going to have that strong connection with the student. And the teacher aide does develop or most of the time does develop a really strong connection with the student involved. So I think it's important that they're part of that process. Clarify roles and responsibilities, develop shared expectations and mechanisms for communication, and use active listening skills. And then, of course, discuss the communication book. A lot of teacher aides may be the person that actually fills out the communication book. I think that's okay as long as you're overseeing that. So, as learning support officers support in the classroom, they can answer individual questions, they can help with reading student work, reread stories with students, reinforce skills by leading a game or activity, listen to the student read, practice skills, helping students or groups, or any other variation of that. That's a fairly sort of limited set of criteria. But they're really there to support what happens in the classroom and specifically what happens with various students that they're assigned to. So they're not there to design curriculum, they're not there to create lessons, they're not there to find lessons, they're there to follow your guidelines in terms of what happens educationally. Other ways to use learning support officer, they can help with research reading materials. So there's nothing wrong with you saying, I need certain activities on a particular subject area, and that they can help you find those resources. They can help you to search online for support materials. They can prepare modifications that are planned by the teacher. Supervision in the playground. Assign tasks that allow the teacher to work with individual students but doesn't place them or you in a legal predicament. So they can't take over your classroom is what that's saying. So you could potentially have a teacher aide working with a group of students while you perhaps focus on some specific students, and particularly those students that might be assigned the teacher aide. So as long as you're there in the classroom, legally you should be covered, but you can't defer any of those responsibilities to the teacher aide. They can assist with any speech therapy or OT therapy program, and they can help with a social skills program as well. So the foundation of effective supervision is rooted in the development of a shared philosophy. So it is really important that you're on board together and that you're collaborating together, and that your teacher aide understands your philosophy and your vision for the classroom. These are some comments that I think that you can read through, and on more that expands more on communication. So I'm not going to read through all of those. The communication book is really important, and you'll probably see various types of communication books while you're in the classroom or in various schools. So some communication books go directly to parents, and you'll probably see this more so in special education settings. I have seen it occasionally in other settings, but it does tend to happen more so in special education setting where it is a fairly extensive book. So in a communication book, at the end of the day, you would let the parents know perhaps what you've done for the day or any sort of significant information that they may need to know. So whether, for some students it's important whether they've eaten their lunch or they didn't eat their lunch, or whether they might have been struggling for the day, or it's also really important to make sure that you have parents know the positive things as well. Don't let the communication book be a book that's just feeding back negative information to parents. It can be really disheartening for parents, and it also means that we're constantly focusing on the negatives rather than focusing on the positives. The communication book can also be for your OTs or for your speech pathologist. So if you're student does see any of those paraprofessionals, they can write in the communication book and let parents know what's happening. It's also really good for relaying information about excursions or incursions or anything that's important happening in the school. But I always used to allow it to be a two-way communication book because it's important to get that feedback from parents. So I always encourage parents, please use the communication book to let me know anything that you're concerned about or anything that I should watch out for during the day in regards to a particular student. And I found that really helpful, especially if I had a student that was having a challenging moment or something happened out of the ordinary. I could go back to the communication book and see if anything was in there, and many times it was, and it was good guidance for me. So other considerations. Learning support officers need time to practice skills and strategies before teachers expect mastery. So you're their mentor, essentially. You're the one there to mentor them along. So that's why that communication is so important. Let them know what you're thinking. Let them know your vision. I used to always say, this is what I'm thinking and why I'm planning this particular activity or going to try this particular strategy because I'm hoping A, B, C might happen. And once they understood my thoughts and methodologies around what I was proposing to do, it was easier for them to, well, not that they wouldn't get on board, but they understood the purpose and it made more sense. So talk with the learning support officer at the end of the class and provide feedback. So that sort of debriefing feedback is really important, and I valued their insight. Some of the teacher aides have been working in schools for a really long time and having incredible insight into students. So I think we should value their feedback. So you could go on Moodle now and share any experiences you've had with working with paraprofessionals and also with support staff. What's worked, what hasn't, what would you like to do better? And how do you think you will work with a paraprofessional? What do you think you will do if you have a paraprofessional in your classroom? So have you had those experiences? If you haven't, how do you think that would work for you? Do you find it confronting having someone in your classroom? How could you resolve that? Because it is really important to allow people in and I always think have an open door policy works best for everyone, but especially for your students. So the individual learning plan I really did cover last week, so I'm not going to go into this into too much detail, but you can read through this again, and it really is a bit of a repeat of what I did cover when I posted that separate video, so I don't want to labour on this again if I can. I think one thing that's important to know is that you can have an individual learning plan for students that are funded, but you can also have a lot of people think you don't need to have an ILP if the student isn't funded. It's a really important document to use for either. So if a student has some challenging behaviours or needs to meet certain criteria, this is a really good way to go. So individual learning plans will reflect the high priority learning needs of the student. And we did go through all of this last week. It's not designed to cover every single learning area and every single curriculum need that a student has. It's meant to target specific goals that you would like your student to achieve. So one of the things that you can do is use a form like this to help you to target what goals that you would like your students to achieve. And I normally do that in collaboration with parents as well. We will talk a little bit more about collaborating with parents next week, but it's important to ask parents what would they like their child to be achieving? What is their high priorities? And what are the needs, challenges, or critical issues? I also think this is important. What are they good at? Because what they're good at can help you to create goals that are achievable. So we shouldn't be creating goals that are not achievable, because that's just a soul destroying experience. So just to revisit SMART goals, they're really important because they do ensure that they are achievable. So they're specific, relating to one particular goal. They're measurable, achievable. So I've seen goals like something like the student will behave in the playground area. I think I said this one last week. Or the student will have a happier demeanour. I actually saw that one a couple of weeks ago. Just kind of blew my mind. Like, well, for one, what does that mean? And why do they not have a happy demeanour? And how do we actually approach that? Are goals realistic and relevant? And are they timely? Social stories are really important, and they're a very important tool to use. Now, they're mostly associated with students on the autism spectrum, but I think we can use social stories for many students. I don't think we should just limit it for those that come under that umbrella. And what a social story should do is it can also then assist with achieving a goal as well, or address certain changes that might be happening, or help students understand what the learning goal is. So it's a really important tool to be able to use. So it also can help us to gauge how a student might be feeling. So if we look at some of these icons, the student can let us know if they're feeling bored or excited or grumpy or sleepy, and that can help us in terms of understanding how they're learning as well. So we can develop social stories that can help them to ask for help, to help them to identify when things go wrong. There's many students who are having challenges, don't always like to be putting their hand up or asking for help. It can be a real problem for them. So a social story can help to address that. It can also help them to identify the people in their class. It can help when there's transitions, and also for them to know who the important people are in their classroom, like their teacher and the assistant. And also it can assist students to identify where various places are in the school. I've often done social stories that identify, here's the art room, here is where the office is, here is where you go to PE, because some of those transitions internally can be really difficult. So you can do a social story that can assist with when things go wrong outside. And so if someone keeps upsetting me, I will walk away. So a social story usually incorporates, or not usually, does incorporate real life situations and addresses those situations with a statement that reinforces behaviour. So rather than turning around and having an argument, or even worse still, having a physical confrontation, if someone's upsetting, they can actually walk away. So it helps them to establish that choice. They could also say, could you please stop? I don't like it. Sorry, I should have done that one first. That was the first part. If they don't leave me alone, I can then talk to the teacher. So there's a 3-step process here. And you've given your students 3 steps to deal with something happening in the classroom. Out in the playground. Daily plans are really important, and these visual schedules are incredibly valuable. I've walked into many schools and seen these on the front of the room or on the whiteboard. They need to be on the desk, because having it so far away can be problematic for many students. And visual daily plans can let students know what's going to be happening. So here is, I can't see that first one, of the name of the student, talking time, working time, fruit and snack, and whatever activities are happening throughout the day. And usually you can interchange these. I like this little, I've not seen this little slide prop before. I think that's really good. So you can also use Velcro on a laminated sheet as well. That works really well. I also like visual timers, so that helps students to know how long they have on an activity. So I think that we'll stop it there, and because I'm aware that you're all dealing with your second assignment, remember that there is a face-to-face session next week, and I will be talking more about the assignment. I'm still trying to get the audio up from the previous face-to-face session. I'm sorry having a lot of trouble with uploading them to Moodle. They're just not for some reason. So I'm really trying to get those up, so I do apologise. Alright, so have a good week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.